Hello, welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. 300 days have passed since the Hamas attack against Israel and Tel Aviv's retaliation, triggering one of the worst conflicts in West Asia in recent times. Over the last 10 months, the Israeli army conducted multiple strikes in Gaza, Hamas's stronghold, killing over 39,000 Palestinians. The regional conflict can escalate further after Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Iran this week. Leader of Hezbollah has warned that the conflict has now entered a new phase. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei has also pledged to avenge Ismail Haniyeh's death as funeral ceremonies took place in Qatar. Are hopes of a potential ceasefire in Gaza more of a mirage now? Joining us now to talk about this all is Gershon Baskin. Joining me now to take this forward is a special guest, Gershon Baskin, Israeli columnist and Middle East director for International Communities Organization. He's also the former negotiator for Israeli hostages. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Let me begin by asking you about the significance of this target. Ismail Haniyeh, a key political figure in the Hamas.
I think that the main importance from Israel's point of view of the targeted killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Iran was to send a message to the Iranians. The Iranians are using their proxies in Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen and Hamas in Gaza. And Israel was sending a message to Iran that we can get you at any time, anywhere we want to. Killing Haniyeh doesn't make a strategic change in the relationship between Israel and Hamas. It doesn't bring Hamas down to its knees. It doesn't even foresee the end of the war between Israel and Gaza. Haniyeh is easily replaced within the Hamas hierarchy. So I don't think it's very significant. The talks between Israel and Hamas were deadlocked before this assassination because the gaps between the two sides remain quite wide.
Right. Now, Haniyeh, as you pointed out, was a negotiator. Now, where does this leave Qatar, where these negotiations were taking place? Where does this leave Netanyahu's credibility? Already his credibility was down among several Middle Eastern countries. But now, what is the way forward in terms of talks?
Well, it's very unclear. The Qatari prime minister said, how do you expect us to negotiate when one side is killing the negotiators on the other side? I think this is a very big problem. If I were the Qatari negotiators, the Egyptians who are in charge of the negotiations, I would put down a deal on the table and tell the Israelis and the Hamas, take it or leave it. And if you decide to leave it, then we are stepping away from the table. What's the point of continuing this negotiation when the sides are obviously not ready to reach an agreement? Israel keeps putting new conditions on the table, which Hamas keeps rejecting. It seems to me that the primary objective of Prime Minister Netanyahu is to find the Hamas leadership in Gaza and to kill them, and then expect a strategic change in the battle plans between Israel and Hamas. But there will be no guarantee that if that happens, that the Israeli hostages will survive. Already, there are 115 hostages left in Gaza, and probably a majority of them are no longer alive.
Right. Now, you've been a negotiator for Israeli hostages in the past. You've handled these situations. As of now, if you were actively negotiating on behalf of the Israeli government, how would you see this move by Netanyahu?
I think it's quite clear. The negotiations that I was involved in the past succeeded because the prime minister, who was also Netanyahu at the time, made a decision that he was willing to accept the deal that's on the table. The negotiations were really on the margin of the deal, on the logistics of the deal, on the names of Palestinian prisoners to be released. But the heart of the deal, the core of it, was already on the table, and it was just a matter for Netanyahu to accept it. He has not yet instructed his negotiators to bring the Israeli hostages home. And it seems quite apparent because of the differences between Netanyahu and his cabinet and the military the military is telling Netanyahu, accept the deal that's on the table, but Netanyahu keeps putting new conditions on the table, and therefore the negotiations don't seem to be going anywhere. There could always be a breakthrough, and we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We're bracing for a coordinated attack by Hezbollah, by Iran, and by Hamas right now in retaliation for the recent Israeli assassinations, or those assassinations that are believed to be done by Israel. We don't know if this will lead to an escalation or there'll be an opening for de-escalating here and getting back to the table. Right now, there are no negotiations going on.
Right. It is being said that Netanyahu is trying to serve his own political interests, trying to stay in power as long as possible. He probably wants a war. This is what is being said in several quarters. Do you think this move of killing and targeting a top Hamas leader could actually make him more unpopular with his own cabinet, with the Israeli people as well?
Unfortunately, no. The immediate reaction of the Israeli public to the assassinations, coupled with the Netanyahu speech in the US Congress, have boosted Netanyahu's support amongst the Israeli public, which is quite bewildering because Netanyahu is the leading prime minister who served on October 7th and was responsible for Israel not protecting itself on October 7th and the horrific events that Hamas committed inside of Israel, all lead to Netanyahu. He's the longest serving prime minister in Israel's history, and he is the only person within the military structure, at least the national security establishment, who refuses to accept any direct responsibility for the failure of Israel to protect itself on October 7th. So it's quite bewildering that Netanyahu remains in power, that he didn't resign, and that his public support seems to be growing.
Right. And my final word to you would be, what's the way out in terms of this war coming to an end, of the remaining hostages being released?
I think the chances are very, very slim that the hostages will be released, that we'll reach an agreement. I think that the Israeli war plans are to find the Hamas leadership in Gaza, who are in bunkers underground, to find them and kill them and use that as their victory picture. But Israel will not leave Gaza. The Israeli military will remain in Gaza, and as long as the Israeli military remains in Gaza, there will be armed insurgency against Israeli soldiers. So this may go on for quite some time, unfortunately.
Right. Gershon Baskin, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Definitely a worrying situation there in Gaza.
Thank you.
Staying with the crisis in the Middle East, the death of Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas leader, has triggered a global response. US President Joe Biden said that this assassination does not help the ceasefire talks. He said that he had a very direct conversation with Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu to discuss this at length. I'm joined by Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Dr. Parsi, let me begin by asking you, now, this could be dangerous. This could actually provoke Iran into a war. Why would Netanyahu take a step of this kind? How does this serve his political priorities right now?
Well, it does serve his political priorities, but it does not serve Israel's political priorities. Netanyahu's political priorities is to expand and prolong the war. He knows that if ceasefire deal would collapse his government, he would lose his job as prime minister, and the charges against him for corruption would move forward, and he would probably end up in jail. So from the very outset, his design has been to make sure that there isn't a ceasefire. We've seen in the Israeli media how they have revealed that he has systematically undermined these negotiations. And this was the ultimate undercutting of those negotiations for a ceasefire, because he killed the guy on the other side of the negotiating table. There is no clearer sign he could have sent to say that he is not interested in a ceasefire deal.
Right. Now, what happens from here onwards? Do you think that the ceasefire talks are completely dead here onwards?
I think in the short term they are. However, Biden has the possibility, he has the leverage to be able to force a ceasefire. Because if Biden doesn't provide the bombs, Netanyahu cannot drop the bombs. So if the United States under Biden is actually serious about getting a ceasefire, they can force it. They don't have to negotiate it. They don't have to rely on Netanyahu's goodwill to be able to actually achieve it. And now we reached a point in which even a ceasefire may not prevent the enlargement of the war as a result of what Netanyahu did by attacking Tehran. Up until just a couple of days ago, it was clear through a ceasefire, you would have de-escalation throughout the region. But now, even with a ceasefire, it's not clear whether an exchange of fire and a potential war between Iran and Israel can be prevented.
Right. Now, there have been at least two occasions in Lebanon and also in Iran where we have seen Israel directly provoking the Iranians, also the Hezbollah, into a full-blown conflict. But the response from Iran at that time was very, very measured. Do you get a sense that Iran will get provoked this time, knowing that this is Netanyahu's game? He's only doing this for his political interests?
I think the Iranians will not move in a way that they think will lead to a larger war, because they're not interested in a larger war. However, I don't believe that the response will be as measured as it was last time. And I also believe that it's much more difficult this time around to choreograph this in such a way that it doesn't lead to a larger war. And part of the reason for that is that there will be other elements involved in this response, most likely, with potentially the Houthis and Hezbollah also partaking in the response. Particularly the Houthis are not entirely on the same page as Iran. They don't have the same discipline, and they don't seem to have the same interests in preventing a larger war. And on top of that, you have a Biden administration that so far is refusing to use the leverage it has to actually restrain the Israelis. If Biden restrained the Israelis, you would also get restraint from the Iranian side. But if you don't see Biden restrain the Israelis, the Iranian calculation will be that the only way to prevent the Israelis from doing this again is by deterring Israel. And that means, at least in the short term, a degree of escalation. And that's very, very dangerous.
Dr. Parsi, you also spoke about Kamala Harris earlier, and you have said that Kamala Harris will not be so unforgiving as Biden. Now, whether you have a Kamala Harris presidency or a Trump presidency, do you think Netanyahu's strategy as far as the Middle East is concerned, as Hamas is concerned, will probably only last for a few months till the American election?
I think that Netanyahu's strategy is to escalate as much as possible up until the election, so that de-escalation will be as difficult as possible after the American elections. If he manages to get a larger war in the next couple of weeks and months, he will have cornered a potential Kamala Harris presidency and force her into supporting Israel just as much as Biden did after the October 7th attacks, and depriving her of being able to take initiatives of her own. Instead, she will only be reacting to the crisis that Netanyahu has created. With Trump, I think Netanyahu is a little bit more careful. Trump will have, or have shown in the past, the ability to be much more forceful with Netanyahu, and I think Netanyahu will be much more careful about crossing Trump's red lines. But nevertheless, it still serves Netanyahu's interest to have as much of a crisis as possible before Trump comes in as president.
Right. So he would really like to leave the next US president with no choice but to just keep reacting to what is unfolding in the Middle East. Dr. Parsi, thank you very much for joining us on the program, giving us your views, very crucial views on the situation unfolding in the Middle East right now. Definitely, things are very, very worrying. We're heading into a short break now, but coming up, Kamala Harris has managed to raise $310 million in July, which is twice the $138 million raised by Trump. In his latest jibe at Harris, Trump has challenged Harris's racial identity. A discussion with former diplomat Casey Singh when we are back.